Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
The turkey was perfectly golden. The cranberry sauce gleamed in crystal bowls, and my family was tearing me apart with words sharper than any carving knife. I sat there at our dining room table in suburban Columbus, Ohio, listening to my father Robert call me a deadbeat failure, while my mother Patricia nodded in agreement, her face twisted with disappointment. My brother Derek smirked from across the table, his wife Amanda, looking uncomfortable, but saying nothing. When I refused to give them specific details about my work, claiming I was just a freelance consultant, my father's voice exploded through the house. "You're 28 years old and living in some fantasy world. When are you going to get a real job like your brother?" My mother's voice cut even deeper. "Go live in the streets if you can't be honest with us about what you actually do for money." I drove away from that Thanksgiving dinner in my McLaren 720S, but I kept the engine quiet as I left their neighborhood. No point in drawing attention to the $400,000 car when my family thought I was broke. The irony burned in my chest as I navigated through the familiar streets where I'd grown up, past the corner store, where I used to buy candy with allowance money, past the park where Derek and I played basketball until we grew apart. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the underground garage of my penthouse building in downtown Columbus. The valet nodded respectfully as I handed him the keys. "Good evening, Mr. Martinez. I hope you had a pleasant holiday." If only he knew. I took the private elevator to the 42nd floor to my home that occupied the entire top level of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, and my living room alone was larger than my parents' entire first floor. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family called me worthless, I was standing in a space worth $12 million. I walked to my home office and opened the laptop that controlled my empire. Neural Sync Technologies wasn't just some startup I'd been tinkering with in my spare time. We were a revolutionary artificial intelligence company focused on neural interface technology, and we were valued at $260 million. I was the CEO, founder, and majority shareholder. My personal net worth sat comfortably at $26 million, not counting stock options that could easily triple that number when our patents went to market next year. The journey to this point hadn't been traditional, and that's exactly why my family couldn't understand it. I'd started coding when I was 14, spending countless hours in the basement of the house I'd just been thrown out of. While Derek followed the prescribed path through high school, college, and law school, I saw a different future. During my junior year at Ohio State, I realized I was learning more from online programming courses and tech forums than from my computer science classes. The professors were teaching outdated languages while I was already working with cutting-edge machine learning algorithms. So I made a decision that horrified my parents. I dropped out, not to become a slacker or chase some impossible dream, but because I'd identified a gap in the neural interface market that could revolutionize how humans interact with artificial intelligence. I spent 3 years living in a tiny apartment, eating ramen noodles, and building the foundational code that would become Neural Sync's core technology. My parents didn't understand. They saw their younger son abandoning education while their older son graduated law school with honors. They saw Derek landing a position at a prestigious firm while I worked odd jobs to fund my research. What they didn't see was the breakthrough I achieved in my 4th year, a neural interface system that could interpret human thought patterns and translate them into computer commands with 97% accuracy. That breakthrough led to our first patent, which led to our first investor meeting, which led to a seed funding round of $15 million. Within 18 months, we'd secured contracts with 3 major tech companies and the Department of Defense. Our latest military contract alone was worth $87 million over 5 years. But I'd kept all of this secret from my family. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to know that people loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. Derek had always been the golden child, the one who made our parents proud by following conventional success markers. I wanted to prove that love shouldn't be conditional on external validation or financial achievement. Now I employed 43 people across our downtown office complex. My head of research was Dr. Sarah Williams, a former MIT professor who'd left academia to join our team. My chief technology officer was Marcus Thompson, a brilliant programmer who'd helped me refine our core algorithms. Our head of business development, Jennifer Castro, had negotiated deals with companies whose names were household brands across America. I poured myself a glass of 20-year-old scotch and stood by the windows looking out at the city where I'd built something remarkable, while my family remained completely oblivious. The cruel words from dinner echoed in my mind. My father's accusation that I was living in fantasy. My mother's suggestion that I belonged on the streets. Derek's smug expression as he watched our parents tear me down. The most painful part wasn't their lack of faith in my abilities. It was their willingness to destroy me emotionally, rather than simply ask what I actually did for work. If they'd shown even a hint of curiosity or support, I might have opened up about neural sync. Instead, they'd chosen judgment and cruelty. I opened my laptop and checked our company's latest financial reports. Revenue for the quarter was up 38%. Our newest neural interface prototype had just passed its final safety testing. 3 venture capital firms were circling with acquisition offers that would make me one of the youngest tech moguls in Ohio history. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer. "Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Don't forget we have the Defense Department presentation on Monday. The Admiral is flying in specifically to see our new interface system." I smiled, despite the emotional turmoil from dinner. While my family was calling me a failure, the United States military was flying high-ranking officials across the country to see my work. The technology I developed in my cramped apartment was now being considered for implementation in fighter jets and submarine navigation systems. But the success felt hollow, knowing that the people who'd raised me couldn't see past their own narrow definitions of achievement. I'd spent years hoping they'd eventually understand my unconventional path. Tonight proved that their love came with conditions I'd never be able to meet, not because I lacked success, but because they lacked the vision to recognize it. I couldn't focus on work Monday morning. The Defense Department presentation went flawlessly, and Admiral Richardson was impressed enough to suggest expanding our contract to include naval applications. But my mind kept drifting back to Thanksgiving dinner. Something about my family's behavior had felt desperate, not just disappointed. The way my father's voice cracked when he called me a failure. The genuine fear I'd seen in my mother's eyes. By Tuesday afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Marcus Thompson, but not for his programming expertise. Before joining Neural Sync, Marcus had worked as a private investigator specializing in financial crimes. His analytical skills had made him invaluable in both careers. "I need you to research my family's financial situation," I told him during our meeting in my office. "Something felt off about Thanksgiving. I want to know what's really going on." Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't question my request. "How deep do you want me to go?" "Everything. Bank records, mortgage payments, credit reports, employment status. I need the complete picture." Within 48 hours, Marcus delivered a report that left me speechless. I sat in my office reading through documents that revealed a financial crisis my family had been hiding for months. My father, Robert, had lost his middle management position at Consolidated Manufacturing 8 months ago when the company downsized their Columbus operations. He'd been making $62,000 annually, but his severance package had run out in July. Since then, he'd been applying for jobs without success. At 54 years old, with 30 years in traditional manufacturing, his skills didn't translate well to the modern economy. My mother, Patricia's part-time bookkeeping work for a local dental office brought in barely $1,100 monthly. That income covered groceries and utilities, but nothing more substantial. The mortgage situation was even worse than I'd imagined. My parents owed $328,000 on a house they'd purchased for $180,000 15 years earlier. They'd refinanced twice, once to pay for Derek's law school, and once to cover my father's medical bills after his heart attack 3 years ago. Their monthly mortgage payment was $2,900, and they were currently 3 months behind. Marcus had obtained copies of correspondence from First National Bank. The foreclosure process had already begun. My parents had exactly 30 days to bring their payments current or lose their house to auction. But the most devastating discovery was buried in Derek's financial records. My supposedly successful lawyer brother was drowning in debt. Law school had cost him $190,000, and his current salary at Brennan Associates barely covered his minimum loan payments. He and Amanda were renting their upscale apartment, but struggling to maintain the lifestyle they'd built on credit cards. Derek's total debt load was over $250,000. The final piece of the puzzle came from email records Marcus had legally obtained through public records requests. My parents had been discussing their financial crisis for weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. They'd planned to ask me for help during dinner, hoping I might have savings they could borrow against. When I appeared to be unemployed or underemployed, their desperation had transformed into anger. Rather than admit their own financial failures, they'd lashed out at what they perceived as my irresponsibility. The cruel words weren't really about me at all. They were about their own fear and shame. I stared at the foreclosure notice dated November 20th. My childhood home, where I'd learned to code in the basement and dreamed of changing the world, would be auctioned off to the highest bidder in 26 days. The basement, where I'd spent countless hours building the foundation for Neural Sync, was about to belong to strangers. According to Marcus's research, a development company called Urban Renewal Properties was planning to bid on several houses in the neighborhood, tear them down, and build luxury condominiums. Everything suddenly made sense. My father's explosive anger when I couldn't provide details about steady employment. My mother's fear disguised as disappointment. Even Derek's presence at dinner when he usually spent holidays with Amanda's family. They'd been hoping for a miracle that I couldn't provide because they didn't know I actually could. The irony was devastating. While they were calling me a failure, I had enough money to solve their problems 10 times over. While they were suggesting I live on the streets, they were about to lose their own home. While they were comparing me unfavorably to Derek, he was in worse financial shape than they realized. I called Jennifer into my office and asked her to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Family emergency. I explained, which was more accurate than she could possibly understand. That night, I drove past my parents' house for the first time since Thanksgiving. The lights were on in the kitchen, and I could see my mother sitting at the table with what looked like bills spread in front of her. My father was pacing in the background, probably on another unsuccessful phone call with potential employers. The house looked exactly the same as it had during my childhood, but now I knew it was 30 days away from being demolished. The maple tree in the front yard where Derek and I used to climb would be cut down. The driveway where my father taught me to change oil would be paved over. The basement where I'd coded my way to millions would become a construction site. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching my parents through the window, knowing I could solve their crisis with a single phone call to my financial advisor. But I also knew that revealing my success now would raise questions about why I'd hidden it. They'd assume I'd deliberately deceived them, rather than understanding my desire for unconditional acceptance. The situation was more complex than simply writing a check. My family's financial crisis had exposed something deeper about our relationship. Their willingness to reject me based on perceived failure revealed that their love came with conditions I'd never fully recognized. I needed time to process this information and decide how to respond. 26 days until the foreclosure auction. 26 days to figure out how to save my family without destroying the possibility of genuine reconciliation. 3 days after receiving Marcus's report, Derek showed up unannounced at my office building. I was reviewing quarterly projections when Jennifer buzzed me through the intercom. "Your brother is downstairs asking to see you," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Jennifer knew about my complicated family situation but had never met any of them. "Send him up," I replied, curious about Derek's sudden desire to reconnect after years of barely speaking. When Derek stepped off the elevator into our reception area, I watched through my office window as he took in the surroundings. Our corporate headquarters occupied 3 floors of a prestigious downtown building. The walls displayed awards from technology conferences and framed articles from business magazines featuring our innovations. Our reception desk was mahogany, and original artwork lined the hallways. Derek's expression shifted from casual confidence to confusion as our receptionist directed him toward my corner office. I could see him trying to process the disconnect between this environment and his assumptions about my employment status. "Oui, comme Gaston," he said, as he entered my office, his voice carrying a forced warmth I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving, and I feel terrible about how things went." I gestured toward the leather chairs facing my desk, maintaining the pretense that I was simply meeting with him in a borrowed conference room. "What brings you downtown, Derek?" He settled into the chair and glanced around my office, taking note of the expensive furnishings and technological equipment. "I wanted to apologize for our parents' behavior. They've been under a lot of stress lately, with money stuff and everything." The phrase "money stuff" was carefully chosen, I realized. Derek was fishing for information about whether I knew about their financial crisis. His eyes kept wandering to my computer setup, the awards on my walls, and the view from my 42nd floor window. "Mom and Dad have always been dramatic," I replied neutrally. "I'm sure they'll get over it." Derek leaned forward, his lawyer training evident in how he structured his questions. "So tell me about this consulting work you're doing. Must be going pretty well if you can afford to work downtown." I gave him a vague smile. "I help companies with their computer systems. Nothing too exciting." "Computer systems?" Derek repeated, as if testing how the words sounded. "That's interesting. What kind of companies?" For the next 30 minutes, Derek probed with the skill of someone trained in cross-examination. He asked about my living situation, my car, my work schedule, my clients. Each question was phrased casually, but I could see him mentally cataloging every detail that didn't fit with his image of his unsuccessful younger brother. When I remained deliberately vague about specifics, Derek's frustration became more apparent. He started mentioning his own career achievements, perhaps hoping to encourage me to share comparable successes. He talked about his recent cases, his partnership track at Brennan Associates, and his plans to buy a house once his student loans were more manageable. Derek said as our conversation wound down. "We should grab dinner sometime this week. Maybe you could show me your apartment, and I could give you some career advice. I have connections in the corporate world that might help you land something more stable than freelance work." I agreed to dinner, curious about where Derek's investigation was heading. We planned to meet Thursday evening at a restaurant near my building. After Derek left, I asked Sarah Williams, our head of security, and a former FBI agent, to run a background check on any suspicious activity around my personal life. Sarah had implemented comprehensive security protocols for NeuralSync, given our government contracts and valuable intellectual property. Her report arrived Friday morning and confirmed my suspicions. Derek had hired Meridian Investigations, a budget detective agency that specialized in insurance fraud and domestic cases. The agency had been conducting surveillance on me since Tuesday, the day after Derek's office visit. Security camera footage from my building showed Derek returning Wednesday evening to photograph my McLaren in the parking garage. Additional footage revealed him following me to Cascade Restaurant, where I'd had lunch with Admiral Richardson to discuss expanding our Defense Department contract. Derek had sat 3 tables away taking pictures with his phone while I discussed classified military applications with a uniformed officer. The most damning evidence was Derek's conversation with Meridian's lead investigator, captured on audio surveillance that Sarah had legally obtained through our corporate security clearance. Derek had explicitly requested financial surveillance to determine my real income source and whether I might have access to significant cash reserves. His plan was becoming clear. Derek intended to gather proof of my wealth, then approach me with a sob story about our parents' financial crisis. He'd position himself as the concerned brother who discovered their plight, then manipulate me into loaning money to save the family home. He'd probably structure it as an investment opportunity or family obligation, never admitting that he'd investigated me or that he knew about my company. The manipulation was sophisticated but transparent once I understood the framework. Derek assumed I'd be grateful for his sudden interest in rebuilding our relationship. He'd leverage family guilt and my parents' genuine crisis to extract money without ever acknowledging his own financial problems or his role in keeping me excluded from family discussions. What Derek didn't realize was that I'd known about the foreclosure for days and had been planning my own response. His investigation had actually made my decision easier. If Derek was willing to spy on me, rather than simply ask for help, it revealed something fundamental about his character and our family dynamics. I called Marcus into my office and asked him to prepare a comprehensive dossier on Derek's activities, including his surveillance efforts and his debt situation. I want everything documented, I told Marcus. If this escalates, I need proof of his behavior. Marcus nodded grimly. You think he's planning something more than just asking for money? I considered the question carefully. Derek's approach was too calculated for a simple request. He was building leverage-gathering ammunition for a conversation where he'd hold all the cards, and I'd be forced to respond defensively. I think Derek believes he's about to outsmart someone he considers inferior, I replied. He's about to discover how wrong he is. That afternoon, I made a decision that would test my family's true character in ways they couldn't imagine. If Derek wanted to play games with manipulation and surveillance, I'd give him an opportunity to reveal exactly what kind of person he really was underneath his polished lawyer exterior. But first, I needed to understand just how far he was willing to go to exploit what he thought was my vulnerability. The dinner meeting would be my chance to observe Derek's strategy in action and plan my response accordingly. I spent the weekend preparing for what would become the most revealing family interaction of my life. If Derek wanted to manipulate me based on false assumptions about my financial situation, I'd give him exactly what he was looking for, a desperate brother in need of help. Working with Jennifer and Harold Brennan, a method acting coach I'd hired for corporate presentations, I developed a comprehensive scenario that would test my family's character under pressure. Harold helped me understand how to project genuine vulnerability and financial desperation without overplaying the performance. First, I rented a studio apartment in a rundown complex near Ohio State's campus. The unit was barely 400 square feet, with yellowed walls, a kitchenette that hadn't been updated since the 1980s, and a view of the building's dumpster area. I furnished it with secondhand furniture from Goodwill and stocked the refrigerator with generic brand groceries. Next, I visited several thrift stores to assemble a wardrobe that suggested financial struggle. Worn jeans, faded t-shirts, a winter coat with a broken zipper, and scuffed sneakers that looked like they'd been worn for years. Harold taught me how to carry myself differently with slightly hunched shoulders and nervous gestures that would suggest stress and insecurity. The final touch was creating fake eviction notices and past due bills using a legal template service. The documents looked authentic enough to fool a casual observer, showing 3 months of missed rent payments and a formal eviction proceeding scheduled for the following week. Tuesday evening, I called Derek from a burner phone I'd purchased specifically for this experiment. "Derek, it's Gaston," I said, allowing my voice to carry genuine exhaustion. "I need to talk to someone and I didn't know who else to call." Derek's tone immediately shifted to concern, though I suspected it was calculated rather than genuine. "What's wrong? You sound upset." "I've been living paycheck to paycheck for months and I just got evicted from my apartment. I have until Friday to find somewhere new or I'll be sleeping in my car." I paused, letting the desperation sink in. "I was wondering if maybe we could grab coffee tomorrow and talk. I know we haven't been close lately, but I'm kind of running out of options here." Derek was quiet for a moment, probably processing how this development might affect his surveillance strategy. "Of course we can talk. Are you okay? Do you need somewhere to stay tonight?" The offer sounded genuine, which gave me a small spark of hope that maybe Derek retained some authentic concern for my welfare. "I'm crashing on a friend's couch for a few days, but thanks. Could we meet at Eddie's Diner on High Street tomorrow around 7? I can't really afford anywhere fancy right now." "Absolutely. And Gaston, don't worry about money. We'll figure something out." Wednesday evening, I arrived at Eddie's Diner wearing my thrift store clothes and carrying a backpack that contained my fake eviction papers. The diner was exactly the kind of place someone with financial problems might choose: fluorescent lighting, vinyl booths with duct-taped repairs, and a menu where nothing cost more than $12. Derek arrived 15 minutes late, and I could see him scanning the restaurant as if he couldn't believe I'd chosen such a downscale location. He looked polished in his business suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the studio apartment. "Gaston," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You look tired. Have you been eating enough?" I rubbed my face, a gesture Harold had taught me to convey emotional exhaustion. "It's been a rough few months. I've been picking up whatever consulting work I can find, but it's not steady income, you know. Sometimes I'll have a good week, then nothing for 2 weeks after that." Derek nodded sympathetically while signaling the waitress. "What exactly happened with your apartment situation?" I pulled out the fake eviction notice and slid it across the table. Derek examined it carefully, his lawyer training evident in how thoroughly he read the legal language. 3 months behind on rent, he observed. "That's tough. How much do you owe total?" $2,400 plus late fees. "But even if I had that money, the landlord wants me out. He's got someone lined up who can pay a higher monthly rate." I hesitated, building toward the crucial moment. "I found a place I can afford, but they want first month's rent plus security deposit up front. It comes to about $2,000 total." Derek set down the eviction notice and studied my face. $2,000. I know it's a lot to ask. I continued, allowing desperation to creep into my voice. "I've never borrowed money from family before, but I'm out of options. I can pay you back as soon as I land a steady contract, probably within a few months." The change in Derek's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. His sympathetic expression shifted slightly, becoming more analytical than emotional. He glanced at his phone, then back at me as if calculating something. "Gaston, I wish I could help, but Amanda and I are pretty tight on money right now. My student loans are killing us, and we're trying to save for a down payment on a house. $2,000 would really set us back." I felt a stab of genuine disappointment, even though I'd expected this response. "I understand. I just thought maybe—" "Have you talked to Mom and Dad about this?" Derek asked, his tone becoming more businesslike. "Maybe they could help out." The suggestion was particularly cruel, given that Derek knew about our parents' financial crisis from his surveillance activities. He was deliberately sending me toward people who couldn't help knowing it would intensify my desperation. "I called them earlier today." I replied truthfully, since I had indeed made that phone call as part of my experiment. Derek leaned forward with apparent interest. "What did they say?" "Mom screamed at me for about 5 minutes about how I should have gotten a real job like you, and how she didn't raise a beggar. Dad hung up on me without saying anything." I paused, letting the pain show in my voice. "Mom's exact words were that I should find a bridge to sleep under if I can't manage my finances like an adult." Derek winced, but I noticed he didn't seem particularly surprised by our parents' reaction. "They're probably just stressed about their own situation." After an hour of conversation, Derek made it clear that he had no intention of helping me financially. He offered vague suggestions about finding a cheaper place to live, maybe getting a roommate or looking into social services for emergency housing assistance. As we prepared to leave, Derek pulled out his phone and took a picture of the eviction notice, claiming he wanted to research similar situations to see if there were legal options I hadn't considered. The evening concluded with Derek giving me a patronizing lecture about financial responsibility and the importance of building an emergency fund. "Maybe this will be a learning experience," he said as we walked toward our cars. "Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they really understand how to manage their lives properly." I drove away from that dinner with complete clarity about my family's character. When they thought I was successful, they rejected me for not following conventional paths. When they thought I was desperate, they abandoned me entirely. Derek's suggestion to contact our parents was particularly manipulative, since he knew they were facing foreclosure and couldn't help even if they wanted to. The most revealing moment had been Derek's immediate shift from concern to calculation once money entered the conversation. He'd gone from offering help to making excuses within minutes, then justified his refusal by lecturing me about responsibility. But the experiment had revealed something even more troubling. Later that evening, Derek sent me a text message. "I've been thinking about your situation, and I really think you need professional help with financial planning. Maybe this will teach you about building a career instead of just drifting through freelance work. Some people need tough love to grow up." My own brother was taking satisfaction in what he believed was my suffering. Rather than feeling sympathy for someone facing homelessness, Derek saw my crisis as validation of his superior life choices. I sat in my penthouse that night looking out at the city lights, understanding for the first time how conditional my family's love had always been. They loved the idea of me succeeding on their terms, but they had no empathy for me as a person struggling with genuine problems. The trap had worked perfectly, revealing truths I'd never wanted to accept about the people who'd raised me. Thursday morning brought news that would change everything. I was reviewing our third quarter financial reports when my assistant Jennifer knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before. "Elena Rodriguez is on line 1, she said, barely containing her excitement. "From Quantum Industries." Elena Rodriguez was a legend in Silicon Valley, the CEO who'd built Quantum Industries into one of the world's most powerful technology companies. Her acquisitions had created billion-dollar success stories, and rumors of her interest could send stock prices soaring overnight. I picked up the phone with steady hands, though my heart was racing. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is an unexpected pleasure." "Mr. Martinez." Her voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "I've been following NeuralSync's development for 6 months, and I'm impressed with what your team has accomplished. I'm flying to Columbus this afternoon specifically to discuss an acquisition proposal." The words hit me like electricity. Quantum Industries wanted to buy NeuralSync Technologies. "I'd be honored to meet with you," I replied, my mind already calculating what this conversation might mean for everyone in my company. "Excellent. I've reserved the boardroom at the Marriott downtown for 6 o'clock. This is time-sensitive, Mr. Martinez. We're prepared to make an offer that will exceed your expectations, but we need a decision within the week." After hanging up, I immediately called an emergency meeting with our legal team, our financial advisors, and our core leadership group. Within 2 hours, our conference room was filled with the people who'd helped build NeuralSync from a basement startup into a revolutionary technology company. Benjamin Hayes, our corporate attorney, had worked with several major acquisitions and understood the implications immediately. If Quantum is making unsolicited offers, it means they see something in our technology that they can't replicate internally. That gives us significant leverage in negotiations. Catherine Morris, our financial advisor, was already running preliminary calculations. Based on Quantum's recent acquisitions and our current valuation, we should expect an offer somewhere between $800 million and $1.2 billion. The numbers were staggering, but I needed to understand what this meant for our employees and our technology's future before making any decisions. At 6 o'clock, I walked into the Marriott boardroom to find Elena Rodriguez reviewing a thick folder of documents. She was smaller than I'd expected from her media appearances, but her presence filled the room with an intensity that reminded me why she was considered one of the most formidable executives in technology. "Mr. Martinez." She stood to shake my hand. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice. I believe in moving quickly when I identify exceptional opportunities." For the next hour, Elena outlined Quantum's interest in our neural interface technology. Their research indicated that our patents could revolutionize everything from military applications to medical treatments for paralyzed patients. Their manufacturing capabilities could scale our innovations globally within 18 months. "Your breakthrough in neural pattern recognition represents a quantum leap beyond anything currently available," Elena explained. "We've tested similar systems from Stanford, MIT, and 3 private companies. None achieved above 60% accuracy in thought-to-command translation. Your system consistently performs at 97%. Then she presented the offer that made my head spin $1.4 billion for complete acquisition of NeuralSync Technologies with immediate cash payment and retention packages for all key employees. I understand this is a significant decision, Elena continued, but our offer expires Friday evening. The neural interface market is evolving rapidly, and we need to move decisively to maintain competitive advantage. I asked for time to review the proposal with my team, and Elena agreed to remain in Columbus until Friday afternoon for my answer. That evening, I met with Benjamin and Catherine to understand the personal financial implications. After taxes, employee profit sharing, and paying off business loans, my personal take would be approximately $637 million. $637 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a figure from someone else's life. This puts you among the youngest tech moguls in American history, Catherine observed. You'd have more liquid wealth than most Fortune 500 CEOs. But as I drove home that night, money wasn't my primary focus. My mind kept returning to Marcus's report about my family's financial crisis. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for Friday morning, exactly when Elena needed my decision about the acquisition. The timing felt like cosmic irony. While my parents prepared to lose their home, I was considering a deal that would make me one of the wealthiest people in Ohio. While Derek smugly lectured me about financial responsibility, I was negotiating with one of the most powerful executives in Silicon Valley. I spent Thursday night on my penthouse balcony looking out at the city where I'd built my empire in complete secrecy. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Derek, probably trying to check on my homelessness situation or gather more surveillance information. The acquisition offer gave me unprecedented leverage to address my family's crisis, but it also presented an opportunity to teach them something about judgment assumptions and unconditional love. They'd revealed their true character when they thought I needed help. Now I had the power to reveal mine when they needed help. Friday morning, I made a decision that would define my relationship with my family forever. The quantum acquisition would proceed, but not before I used my newfound wealth to create a moment of truth that none of us would ever forget. I called Marcus and asked him to research the foreclosure auction procedures. I want to know exactly when and where it's happening, who's expected to bid, and what the minimum requirements are for participation. Planning to make an appearance? Marcus asked. Planning to make a statement? I replied. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for 10 o'clock Friday morning at the county courthouse. Several local investors and one development company were expected to bid. The minimum opening bid was set at $200,000 with cash payment required within 48 hours. As I prepared for the most important morning of my life, I realized that my family's crisis had given me something more valuable than money: the opportunity to choose love over resentment, generosity over revenge, and forgiveness over judgment. But first, they needed to understand exactly who they'd been talking to all these years. Friday morning, I dressed in my most expensive tailored suit, a charcoal gray Armani that cost more than most people's monthly salary. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a young tech executive worth hundreds of millions of dollars. No more hiding, no more pretending to be someone I wasn't. Benjamin Hayes met me in the courthouse parking lot carrying a briefcase filled with financial verification documents. Catherine Morris arrived separately, with bank officers from First National, the same institution that was foreclosing on my parents' home. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The verification letters confirm liquid assets sufficient for any reasonable bid, Benjamin reported. We're prepared to execute immediate payment up to $5 million if necessary. I nodded, though I doubted the bidding would reach anywhere near that level. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about truth revelation, and the moment when my family would finally understand who they'd been judging all these years. At 9:45, we walked into the courthouse to find the auction already drawing a crowd. Local investors clustered near the front, reviewing property descriptions and discussing bidding strategies. A representative from Urban Renewal Properties had claimed a prime seat, clearly confident about acquiring multiple properties for demolition and redevelopment. Then I saw my family. My parents stood near the back of the room looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen them. My father, Robert, wore a suit that had probably fit him better 20 pounds ago before months of stress and unemployment had aged him visibly. My mother, Patricia, clutched a tissue, her eyes red from crying. Derek and Amanda flanked them like supportive pillars, though Derek kept checking his phone with obvious impatience. He probably had billable hours waiting back at his law firm, and this family drama was cutting into his precious time. None of them noticed me initially. I positioned myself along the side wall where I could observe their reactions without drawing attention. At exactly 10 o'clock, the auctioneer called for attention and began reading the legal description of my parents' property. 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom colonial on Maple Street, built 1978, assessed value $310,000 minimum bid, $200,000. The bidding opened predictably. A local house flipper started at $200,000. An investor who specialized in rental properties countered with $220,000. Urban Renewal Properties jumped to $250,000, clearly intending to discourage smaller bidders. I watched my parents' faces as strangers casually discussed purchasing their home. My mother gripped my father's arm, whispering something that made him nod grimly. Derek leaned over to say something to them, probably explaining the legal process or offering hollow comfort. When the bidding reached $290,000, Urban Renewal Properties seemed confident they'd scared off the competition. Their representative, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd done this dozens of times, raised his hand casually to $300,000. That's when I made my move. $350,000. I said, clearly, raising my hand from my position along the wall. Every head in the room turned toward me, including my family's. I watched recognition dawn on their faces like watching a sunrise in slow motion. My father's mouth fell open. My mother gasped audibly. Derek's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something approaching panic as he pulled out his phone and started typing frantically, probably Googling my name, to confirm what he was seeing. Urban Renewal Properties countered with $375,000, but their representative kept glancing at me nervously. My suit, my posture, and Benjamin's presence beside me clearly suggested I had resources beyond a typical house flipper. $400,000, I responded calmly. The room buzzed with whispers. $400,000 was significantly above assessed value, suggesting either emotional attachment or unlimited resources. The Urban Renewal representative hesitated, calculating whether this property was worth a bidding war. Derek pushed through the crowd toward me, his face flushed with confusion and anger. Gaston, what are you doing here? Where did you get this kind of money? Are you involved in something illegal? I ignored him, completely keeping my attention on the auctioneer. The Urban Renewal representative had decided the property wasn't worth pursuing beyond $400,000. No other bidders remained. Going once at $400,000, Yam, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Sold to bidder number 7 for $400,000. The gavel fell with a sound that echoed through my childhood. I just purchased my parents' home for cash, saving it from demolition and keeping it in the family forever. Chaos erupted immediately. Derek grabbed my arm, demanding explanations. My parents pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down both their faces. Other bidders stared at the young man who'd casually outbid a development company. The auctioneer approached with paperwork requiring my signature and proof of funds. Catherine stepped forward smoothly, presenting bank verification letters that confirmed my ability to execute immediate payment. Mr. Martinez, the auctioneer said professionally, will need certified payment within 48 hours. The payment will be wired this afternoon, Catherine replied, handing him additional documentation. My father reached me first, his voice breaking as he tried to speak. Gaston, I don't understand. Where did this money come from? I looked into his eyes, seeing genuine confusion mixed with desperate hope. The house is yours, Dad. It always was. But first we need to talk. My mother was crying openly now, repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over, while Derek continued demanding explanations about my financial resources. "Who are you?" Derek asked, his lawyer training evident in how he phrased the question. "I mean, who are you, really?" I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, handing it to my father. He read it slowly, his lips moving, as he processed the words. Gaston Martinez, Chief Executive Officer, Neural Sync Technologies. My mother looked over his shoulder and gasped when she recognized the company name. Neural Sync had been featured in Columbus Business Journal multiple times over the past year, including a cover story about local tech companies, attracting national attention. Derek snatched the card from my father's hands and stared at it like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He pulled out his phone again, this time searching for Neural Sync Technologies specifically. The search results provided everything he needed to understand how completely wrong he'd been about everything. Company valuation, employee count, government contracts, technology patents, and dozens of articles featuring my work in artificial intelligence and neural interface development. "You're the founder," Derek said slowly, his voice barely audible. "You're the CEO they interviewed on Channel 6 about the Defense Department contract." I nodded calmly. "I'm also the son who asked you for $2,000 3 days ago and the brother you lectured about hitting rock bottom to learn responsibility." Derek's face went white as he realized I knew about his surveillance activities and his cruel response to my fake crisis. Amanda looked confused by the exchange, but my parents were beginning to understand the implications. "You've had this money the whole time," my mother whispered. "When we threw you out at Thanksgiving, when we said those horrible things, you could have told us you were successful." "I could have," I agreed. "But I wanted to know whether you loved me for who I am or for what I could provide." Thanksgiving answered that question pretty clearly. The courthouse crowd was dispersing, but several people lingered to watch our family drama unfold. I suggested we continue the conversation somewhere more private. "There's something else you need to know," I said as we gathered near the courthouse steps. "I accepted an acquisition offer this morning. Quantum Industries is purchasing Neural Sync Technologies for $1.4 billion. The number hung in the air like something from a different universe. My father actually stepped backward, as if the information had physical weight. Derek was the first to speak, his voice hollow with realization. "You're about to become one of the richest people in Ohio." "I already am one of the richest people in Ohio," I corrected. "I have been for 3 years. The acquisition just makes it official." That evening, I invited my family to my penthouse for the first time. The private elevator, the panoramic city views, and the obvious luxury of my home provided a stark contrast to their assumptions about my lifestyle. My private chef had prepared a dinner that showcased the kind of life I'd been living while they thought I was failing at everything. The irony wasn't lost on anyone as we sat around a dining table worth more than most people's cars, eating a meal that cost more than my parents' monthly grocery budget. "I need you to understand something," I began as we settled into the conversation that would define our future relationship. I didn't hide my success because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because I wanted to know who would love me without conditions. My mother was still crying periodically, overwhelmed by guilt and relief in equal measure. "We were so scared," she whispered. "When your father lost his job, when the bank started calling, we didn't know what to do. We thought maybe you had some savings we could borrow, but when you seemed unemployed, you lashed out instead of asking for help," I finished gently. "You assumed the worst about me rather than trusting me enough to explain your situation." My father cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "We've been so proud of Derek's traditional success that we couldn't see your path might lead somewhere even better. I thought dropping out of college was giving up on your future. I didn't understand you were building something revolutionary." Derek had been unusually quiet throughout dinner, processing the revelation that his investigation and manipulation attempts had been transparent to someone with my resources. When he finally spoke, his words carried genuine humiliation. "I hired investigators to research your finances," he admitted. "I thought I was being clever, gathering information to help the family. I never considered that you might already know about the crisis and were planning your own response. I nodded acknowledgement of his confession. I know about Meridian investigations, the surveillance, and your plan to manipulate me into providing financial assistance. I also know about your debt situation and why you couldn't help me when I asked for $2,000. Derek winced at the reminder of his cruel response to my fabricated crisis. You were testing us. I was giving you an opportunity to show me who you really are when someone you love needs help. The results were educational. But this wasn't a conversation about revenge or punishment. This was about rebuilding our family on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. I'm accepting the quantum acquisition, I announced. Part of my wealth will fund the Martinez Family Foundation focused on helping families facing foreclosure keep their homes. I want you and Mom to run the foundation, Dad. It'll give you meaningful work and financial security. My father's eyes widened with surprise and hope. You'd trust us with something that important after how we treated you? I'd trust you to learn from this experience and use it to help other families avoid the same crisis. You understand the fear and desperation of losing your home better than anyone. I turned to Derek. The foundation will need legal counsel for complex cases. If you're interested, we can discuss retaining your firm for that work. Derek looked stunned by the offer, especially given his recent behavior. After everything I did, you'd want to work with me? I'd want to work with the brother who recognizes his mistakes and commits to being better. Whether that's you depends on choices you make going forward. The conversation continued for hours, touching on years of misunderstandings, missed opportunities for honest communication, and the conditional nature of love within our family. My parents shared their fears about my unconventional path, their financial stress, and their realization that success comes in many forms. Derek acknowledged his competitive resentment, his assumption that he'd always be the more successful brother, and his manipulation attempts that revealed character flaws he hadn't previously recognized. The money changes everything practically, Sauer, Wald, I explained as we concluded our discussion. But it doesn't automatically fix our relationships. We need to rebuild trust based on who we actually are, not who we thought each other was. Over the following weeks, we established new patterns for family interaction. Dinner twice monthly at the family home I'd saved from foreclosure. Open communication about challenges and successes without judgment or comparison. Mutual respect for different life paths and definitions of achievement. The Martinez Family Foundation launched 3 months later with my parents as executive directors. Their first success story was the Thompson family, whose mortgage crisis mirrored my parents' experience, but who received intervention before reaching foreclosure. Watching my mother counsel Mrs. Thompson about financial options while my father coordinated with the bank demonstrated how personal pain could transform into meaningful service. Derek restructured his career to focus partly on foundation legal work, finding purpose in helping families navigate complex housing situations, rather than pursuing corporate partnerships solely for status and income. The foundation's work attracted media attention, including a feature story about the family that had nearly lost their home, but turned their crisis into a mission to help others. The article mentioned that the foundation's anonymous benefactor had chosen to help families because everyone deserves the security of home and the dignity of unconditional love. 6 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, we gathered again around the same table where harsh words had been spoken. This time, the conversation centered on foundation families we'd helped, technology innovations improving people's lives, and gratitude for second chances. My mother had framed the newspaper article about our foundation's work, displaying it prominently in the kitchen, where she'd once spread foreclosure notices in desperation. My father had developed expertise in housing law and financial counseling that made him genuinely valuable to families in crisis. Derek had learned to ask for help directly, rather than manipulating situations, and his marriage had strengthened once he stopped carrying the burden of maintaining appearances beyond his means. I keep thinking about that Thanksgiving, my mother said, as we cleaned dishes together. How different everything could have been if we just talked honestly about our problems instead of attacking you for what we thought were yours. I smiled, remembering the anger and pain of that evening compared to the peace and connection we'd built since then. Everything happened exactly as it needed to. Our family was broken in ways we didn't recognize. Sometimes you have to lose something completely before you can rebuild it correctly. The greatest lesson hadn't been about money or success or even forgiveness. It had been about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, and how genuine relationships require accepting people for who they are rather than who you think they should be. My wealth had provided the means to solve practical problems, but rebuilding our family had required something more valuable: the willingness to see past hurt feelings and choose connection over resentment. As I drove home that evening to my penthouse overlooking the city where I'd built an empire while my family remained oblivious, I reflected on the journey from that devastating Thanksgiving to this peaceful Christmas celebration. The boy who'd coded in his parents' basement had become a man who could save their home with a single phone call. But more importantly, the son who'd felt rejected for his unconventional choices had become someone who understood that love requires seeing people clearly and accepting them completely. True wealth, I'd learned, wasn't measured in bank accounts or company valuations. It was measured in relationships built on honesty, trust, and the kind of love that doesn't depend on external achievements or social expectations. The foundation continued growing, helping dozens of families avoid foreclosure, while providing my parents with purpose and my brother with meaningful legal work. But the real success was simpler: a family that had learned to love each other without conditions, support each other without judgment, and communicate honestly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Have you ever had to choose between holding on to resentment and rebuilding a relationship with someone who hurt you? Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who challenge us to become our best selves, even when their methods are painful. I'd love to hear your thoughts about forgiveness and family in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding success on your own terms. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that unconditional love is possible even after the deepest disappointments. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that every relationship can be rebuilt with patience, honesty, and the courage to see past surface appearances to the heart of what really matters. Until next time, remember that the greatest victories aren't always about winning against others, but about choosing love even when it's difficult.